All right. Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We are so glad to have you here with us this morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's session of the MO-NACA Prevention Skill Builder series. If this is your first time joining us, this is a bi-monthly interactive training series for anyone and everyone in Missouri who is engaged in child abuse prevention, education, or training. Um, all of these sessions in the series are recorded, and recordings and materials, including the slides, will be made available to everyone following the training. If you're interested, if this is your first session and you're interested in seeing the previous sessions, all of the other trainings are recorded and uploaded on the MO-NACA YouTube page. We'll make sure that that is linked in the follow-up email as well. So, um, because our session is recorded and all the materials will be shared, we are not admitting AI note takers into the Zoom. So feel free to take your own notes the old-fashioned way or to wait for the email and you can get the recording, the slides, all of that stuff. And that'll come to you next week. One little housekeeping thing. We do not have a scheduled break today. This is a 90-minute training. And like I said, we have an ambitious agenda. So we don't have a break scheduled. So please take care of yourself as you need to. Step away if you need to and take care of yourselves. All right. We are here today to talk about navigating tough questions and challenging conversations for facilitators. We're really fortunate in Missouri to have this incredible network of folks who are dedicating their time and energy to going out into their communities to raise awareness, to engage in prevention, to reach hearts and minds. And so we're really excited today to have the opportunity to talk about the tools and resources and skills that facilitators can use that hopefully will make hard conversations a little bit easier and help you feel a little bit more prepared and equipped to approach them. So, before we go any further, I've already been talking. Let me tell you who I am. If we haven't met yet, I'm Kiki Saragnis. I am very fortunate to serve as the Director of Prevention and Outreach for the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse. I use she and her pronouns, and I am coming at you live this morning from Kansas City, Missouri, where it is very sweaty and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. I would also like to take a minute to share the spotlight with my co-facilitator today, Stephanie Knoll. All right, Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Knoll. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at St. Louis Anti-Violence Project. We're in St. Louis, and we're also sweaty. If you're not familiar with us, we bring awareness around relational violence within into the LGBTQIA plus community. So we do that through education, advocacy, and outreach. So been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years, have done facilitations, have done outreach. So I'm really excited because Kiki and I said, hey, I don't think we got formal training on some of these topics. So excited that we can actually provide this for you all today. And thank you again to Kiki for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Really excited to have this conversation with you today. All right, folks. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, say hi, let us know where you're calling in from or what organization you're here with today. Um, we have we usually have a fairly full house in here, so we don't go around and do introductions anymore. But we love to get acquainted and see who's here and say hi to all the familiar faces and to meet some new folks. If you have questions or comments throughout the training, please feel free to use the chat or to come off of mute. The goal of this training series is to meet the needs that folks in our facilitation network have. And so, if we are talking around something that you're curious about, or you want to dig a little bit deeper, please prompt us. We want to do that. We're going to keep an eye on the chat. And if you like using the little like raise hand icon, that's a good way to keep track of who has comments. But also, sometimes it's hard to find. So, feel free to come off of mute as well. All right, so briefly today, some of our goals, our learning objectives for this session are to equip folks here with the skills to identify key messaging to anchor you during challenging conversations, because we are all having those all the time. To identify opportunities to set and maintain boundaries in order to engage in constructive conversations. Boundaries as a facilitator are so critical. We are going to talk about that a lot this morning. And then to utilize strategies for challenging conversations and tools to validate, de escalate, and bridge with community members, particularly when things start to feel a little divided or fragmented or difficult. These are the goals we're working toward this morning. But before we get into the weeds too much, we want to hear a little bit from you all. You guys are out in the community, out in the field, doing this work, and we want to hear a little bit more about your experiences as a facilitator. You probably came to this session because you have had some challenging conversations or had to deal with getting tough questions.
Hey,
Um,
Mama. Hey, yeah. Okay.
oh, here we go. So we will go ahead and kind of get into it, right? So feel free to use the chat or come off of mute. What are some of your hot buttons as a facilitator? The things that you know kind of get under your skin a little bit or get you heated during a conversation.
So are we thinking more like, because we mostly facilitate in Springfield, the three of us with youth, which I think is different than general community. So what are we like as a facilitator of what? Just what do
It can
you
be with
think?
any audience. I think that's a great question. And yes, your interactions with youth probably might look a little bit different than they would with adults. And any of us who work with youth and kids can tell you that they sure know how to push your buttons too.
Honestly, the kids I have actually been really lucky. When I started, there were some stories from my teammates about of some students like pushing back. I've never really had that. My thing with students is what have they heard at home? Like so for example, we talk about physical abuse. What? Oh, I thought they were saying something to me. Physical abuse, corporal punishment. And so if they're hit at home, they feel like that's okay. It might be kind of eye-opening to them. Whereas if we're
Mhm.
talking to the adults and we're talking about it, they might be more like, oh, whatever, yeah, that's not abuse. I can spank my kid as hard as I want or whatever. So with kids, it's more of a like, hey, I, I, I don't want to call your parents out or your family out for something that they think is okay, but it might be crossing a line. And so with kids, it's hard when they like we might be opening their eyes to something and then we might get a bunch of questions about, well, is this abuse, well, is this abuse, and it's like, well, I don't want to say you're not being abused, but it is starting to kind of toe the line maybe. And we have a script, we have a schedule having to get back onto, and so I think that's one of the things for me as a facilitator is with kids we're kind of pushing back against what is okay in their family. And with adults, they might be tuning us out because they're like, whatever, I am allowed to do these things to my kid because it was done to me, probably. Right.
Yeah, there are so many situations where we find ourselves, whether intentionally or unintentionally, challenging, the norms of someone's family or community. Um, and I think probably most of us have had the situation of being on both sides of that. And when you're the one who's feeling challenged, right? Defensiveness might come up, right? Frustration, confusion, fear. Like there's a lot of feelings that can bring up, whether you're talking with young people or adults. I want to lift up a couple of the comments I'm seeing in the chat too. Victim blaming, which yeah, is a big umbrella, but absolutely is a hot button probably for almost all of us on here, maybe for everyone. Um, I see someone said when no one believes them. Whew, that is a hard one, right? Especially when folks are engaging with you after they haven't been believed, maybe for a long time.
That was one that Jessica and I encountered recently at a DYS facility. They were like, "Well, I did tell somebody and nothing happened. I did tell this person," and it's just like, I I just have to tell you to just keep telling and tell different people, and hopefully somebody will eventually do something, because that is the hardest question I think that I get in, and it's the hardest part of my job when kids say, "Well, I did tell somebody and nobody cared," and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. It's heartbreaking. I'm seeing, hard to tell sometimes if people are making light of the topic or they're just uncomfortable, minimizing the seriousness of something. Oh, back in my day, we did that and it turned out fine. Absolutely. Yeah. Are there other, this is maybe similar question, maybe this is a little, feels a little bit different, but are there kinds of questions or pushback that concern you or worry you as a facilitator or that really throw you off your game?
I will say, without Jessica at that DYS one, who Jessica comes from children's division, I would have been kind of lost, because it was a lot of, well, I did tell, I did report it, and this is, like one girl said, we got the letter in the mail saying that it didn't happen, and my mom was calling me a liar, and Jessica was there to be like, hey, this is what unsubstantiated really means. I'm sorry that that's the way she interpreted it. But those questions of like, I have done these things, then it just makes me feel so helpless. Like, it throws me off. I don't know how to help you in this moment. I definitely worry about getting those when I go into certain schools, for sure, or the schools that we work with where we know that the counselors maybe aren't as engaged. We've heard a lot of that, like, oh yeah, that kid, I know, and it's like, okay, but they're still talking about it to people, so maybe there is something that we still need to be addressing. And
Mm,
that just, I kind of go into those places worrying about how am I going to talk to that counselor when I know that they're probably going to brush it off.
I
absolutely.
think in the situation that Jamie was talking about, the one that threw me off the most was when the girl was like, well, what if I lied about my age and they didn't know? And trying to convince her that that was still not her fault because it's the adult's responsibility to make sure that they're not doing things with minors. So that one kind of like threw me for a loop for a second. But
Yeah, kids are good at throwing us for a loop. Oh, I'm seeing a comment in the chat too. People sharing stories about false reports. We know that it does happen, and I don't want to minimize it, particularly the racialized history, but it's not the majority, and I don't want to distract from the larger issues. Yeah. This is like, thank you for tossing this one in here, Becca. I think this is one of those times when we're like holding two complicated truths at the same time. And sometimes you um are trying to make space for a lot of nuance in a conversation that may or may not be there with the folks that you're talking to, or they may or may not be like ready to have that conversation. Because I think we get that a lot about, we talk about false reporting and allegations. That's a common pushback, right? And while we know the data, right, the data supports that, especially children, right, coming forward are like 98 or to 99% of the time telling the truth. We also know that there have been really high profile and really and false allegations that have resulted in really significant and severe consequences that people are aware of and thinking about. And yeah. All right. Thank you all for getting the ball rolling for us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and we're going to talk about preparing for tough conversations to kind of get us started.
Yes, so I don't know about you all, but I like to plan, prepare as much as possible before I have presentations. We can't prepare for everything, right? Like things are going to happen, but I think, specifically around preparing for challenging conversations, we want to make sure that we have those strategies to set ourselves up for success. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this section. We're really going to get into the bulk of during the conversation, but I think it's important that we talk about a few things. So first one being, we want to make sure that we set clear learning objectives. So when we have those learning objectives, not only does it root us in what are we going to be talking about, but it also roots the participants on the expectations of that training, of that presentation. It gives us some guardrails, right? With that, we also want to ensure that we have clear meeting norms in our presentations. Now, sometimes we have the opportunity that we can co-create those meeting norms. A lot of times I actually have those already prepared, and then I'll ask, hey, is there other meeting norms we need to add? But I always try to start off with like, let's keep an open mind. The learning objectives are these things. We're going to stay on topic. We want to make space, take space, and then talking about safety, right? Because a lot of the topics that we're presenting may be things that people in the audience have experienced. So letting people know they have the permission to leave the room, to take a break. And then Kiki and I were talking about boundaries, and I think, oh, this is such a major part of preparation is making sure that we understand our boundaries and not just with the hosts, but with our organization, understanding them within ourselves and even the supervisor. So, Kiki, I know you had some really great suggestions when we were talking about this too.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm thinking too about the example that Jamie and Jessica were sharing earlier about having a co-facilitator. I think
Yes.
when you have the opportunity to have a co-facilitator, especially someone who you have a comfort level with, it's important to have that boundaries conversation with them. Like, hey, this is where I have to kind of tap out. So I might kind of turn it over to you if it gets into this topic, right? Or if this thing comes up. And I think also being really clear with your co-facilitator about, at what point do we need to set boundaries with our audience? Do we need to do that? Um, is there a situation where we might need to end this conversation early because it kind of gotten away from being safe, right? I also think that, even for yourself as a facilitator, getting really clear and having, maintaining your boundaries around what level of self-disclosure you're comfortable with. The same way that, Stephanie mentioned that there are folks in our audience, any room that you're talking to, you have survivors in there and you have people who have been impacted by violence in other ways. And in the same way, this is not going to be probably news to anyone. A lot of us come to this work, a lot of people in our field come to this work because have also been impacted personally, or by in our communities or to our loved ones, right, by violence. And so there may be some amount of self-disclosure that we're comfortable making, right? Yeah, I remember when this happened to someone that I know, and these were things that I was grappling with, right? It's also helpful to get really clear about what amount of self-disclosure is conducive to the learning environment. There have been really beautiful moments where I've seen people make self-disclosures about their own survivor experiences, right? That have really humanized the conversation in the room and like made it feel really rich. There have also been times when I've seen someone make like kind of disclose their own survivor experience to a group to try to do that, and the group was not ready for it. And it became really painful for that person. And they experience victim blaming as a facilitator, which is something that as facilitators we're often ready to address, but experiencing it in the moment is a very different thing.
Yeah,
So
most definitely.
yeah. So being clear about what your triggers are as a facilitator, what you are comfortable with and what kind of crosses a line for you. Having conversations with your co-facilitator or your supervisor. If you are a supervisor, have those conversations with your facilitators, right? You don't have to make them tell you what their triggers are, but have them do some reflecting, right? On what they're comfortable with. And then knowing your non-negotiables, right? At this point, if this happens, we are not going to be able to continue in the same way, right? If there is language that is used, right? If there are, slurs or like hate speech coming up, if there are certain behaviors coming up, then that might be a situation where we have to end this conversation um, sooner than we anticipated.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be co-presenting at a conference, and I've been practicing with my co-facilitator, and we have legitimate gestures that we make to the other person. So mine is like nodding my head to them, stepping back so that they know, oh, this is maybe clearly going against a boundary, or I just need a second to, think about what has been asked or posed. So I think being prepared for situations like that, rather than trying to figure it out in the situation, is way better than something escalating and becoming not only uncomfortable for the presenter themselves, but also the people who are attending that training. I also think it's important that we set intentions for the training and the presentation. I do a lot of this internally, but I loved Kiki was like, "Oh, I tell people to do it like through journaling and writing it down." And I think it's important that before we go into a training that we really know what the goals are, what I want the participants to get out of that. And then also making sure that I have my boundaries kind of set, that I understand what those boundaries are. All right.
Yeah. And I think if there are probably some questions and comments that we're really used to addressing. Those are kind of like your FAQs, right? Your frequently asked questions that you probably have a really good response for. So just kind of keeping those in your back pocket and thinking about them. If it's a new topic, right? Something that you haven't necessarily presented on a lot or a new audience, it might be worth working through with a colleague or a co-facilitator, identifying some questions that you might that might come up or how to address them. Absolutely.
All right, Kiki, can you go to the next slide?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot we were. I just kept yapping
I should have
away.
done my nod.
No, you're good. I see. I prepared. I was like
And
telling Stephanie before we started. I'm getting ahead of myself as a facilitator. I just keep talking, and I did it right now. So
that is totally,
we're
totally fine.
we're
Uh,
practicing what we preach. Don't worry.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, like Kiki said, we're trying to identify those common questions. I tell people that if they haven't presented on a topic, to try to do it with a colleague that has done it or a supervisor. And if there isn't an organization, FAQs, creating those for themselves. And I don't know about you all, but like sometimes those FAQs are very jargony, doesn't sound like us. It doesn't sound genuine. And so I tell people, think about like, how would you respond to that? We don't want it to be scripted, but we want to have some of those things in our back pocket just in case. And then being aware of our audience. We don't want to rely on stereotypes. So we want to consider language. We want to share examples that are relevant. So if we're talking to a group that's in a rural area, we're probably not going to talk about the urban area specifically, but we're being really thoughtful about examples that are meaningful, and not feeding into any inappropriate stereotypes. And then I added this last minute, Kiki, because
Ooh.
my education background came into play. But I also try to think about, how do I create an inviting atmosphere? So when people are coming in, is it lively? Am I smiling? Am I talking to people? As I'm presenting, am I going to be open arms, making sure that physically I remind myself that I need to be smiling and slowing down? What can we do to make it an inviting and friendly atmosphere? Because sometimes if we show up very closed off and we don't prepare for that openness, the conversation is really, it doesn't really get started, and we're, um, frustrated about like what's happening in the moment rather than providing a really great experience. So if we can prepare for that, making sure we think through those things, making sure that we're there with ample time, it creates a good ambiance when we're going into a presentation.
I love that you added this. This is such a good one. I think We get to set the tone so much as the facilitator, even if it's not your space, even if it's not a group you've worked with before, you are letting people know it's okay to be comfortable here. It's okay to ask questions here. It's okay to, be friendly with each other here. And the way that you interact sets that tone so much.
Yes,
I
but you have to be prepared for it. You
Yes.
can't just try to do it on the fly. So I think thinking through like what feels authentic for me and how can I show up and how can I create that space.
Love that.
So I think we're going into another discussion, aren't we? So
We
the
sure are.
discussion is how do you prepare ahead of time for potentially charged or challenging conversations? We'd love to have you share something that helps you prepare for difficult facilitation or facilitation that could get difficult.
Mhm.
And you can drop it in the chat or if you want to come off mute.
I don't always want to be the only one talking, but oh, good. Somebody else put something in the comments. I will say though, a lot of times we share as a team. Like we prepare for, hey, this might be a more difficult school, or like when we knew we were going into DYS with, you know, who girls who had histories, being prepared for that, having those kind of in your back pocket of what might I need to say. Like we always try to start our presentations with, this is a safe place, but we also don't really want personal stories for a lot of reasons, which of course we started with, and I tried to emphasize that, and we still ended up with a lot of, yes, sorry, Division of Youth Services, DYS, I keep saying that. Um, uh, we still ended up with a lot of stories, or the girl saying, well, like, what if this happened to somebody? But it was obviously a very personal story. So I think having conversations with your teammates, because I know sometimes they are really good at saying, well, this is what I would say if something comes up. So you kind of already have those pre thought of notes that you can take in with you in your head or written down.
Yes. I love that. I'm seeing some other notes in the chat. Somebody said, write notes on comments that I don't want to forget.
Mhm.
Yes. I always think I'm going to remember that. That was so good. And then, right, take notes. I'm doing that right now.
Oh, I like the thinking of one-liners that are widely applicable or phrases you can buy your time. We'll talk about that during the presentation because I have a few that I do. But you can't try to make up that phrase in the moment. You really have to have those in your back pocket before the presentation.
Absolutely. Okay. Another note from Alexis about taking important reminder notes. Asking questions of other coworkers who are more expert in the field also helps. It's like workshopping your thoughts. I love that.
Well, I guess also just thinking, oh, go ahead, Bart.
I was going to say something else that we could add was you don't need to know everything. I think going in with the mindset of I need to know every single answer, when something does come up that you don't know, it can be frustrating and concerning, and you could um, have self-doubt. But if you go in just saying, you know what, I don't know that, but I'll find out more and I can get back to you. Do you have an email address? Do you have something I can reach out to? You don't have to know everything right away. Just know that you can look it up and you can find those answers, and then always circle back to get back with those people.
Yeah, and that's true confidence, right? Like going into a presentation and knowing like I don't have to be the expert on everything and walking in and knowing that I do know certain things, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes we have to talk ourselves up going into those spaces.
Yes. And I think the same way that it sets the tone, right? We were talking about setting the tone earlier. Acknowledging when you hit a limitation sets the tone that it's okay for other people in the space to be learning stuff too. I think as adults, there's a lot of pressure. We should already know this, maybe, or why didn't I already know that? None of us can know everything. I have a toddler, and I feel like something I tell him every single day. He'll ask me a question, and I'll say, I don't know. And I'll say, why not? And I'll say, even grown-ups don't know everything, which he finds very disappointing, but I think is important as an important reminder. It's an important reminder for me every single day, too. Ooh, okay. Okay, people are sharing some of their back pocket phrases in the chat. I love this. I completely understand this is a difficult topic, and I would love to continue this discussion. For the sake of time, let's table it and get back on topic. One of my key phrases is, that is a great question. Yes. Then I say what I will do to dive into researching that question. Oh, I love that you're not just telling them, I'm going to get back to you, but that you're saying, and if you want to find out, this is how you could get that information too.
Mhm.
You're still offering your expertise and your services, and you're empowering your audience members to do a little bit of their research too. I love this.
Oh, the visible parking lot. That's a really great idea. So ha being prepared to have something there to, okay, we're going to parking lot, put that in the parking lot. That's a really great idea too.
Yes. And if folks are a little disappointed that there's not time to talk about it, that's a good way to be like, I promise we're not going to forget because look, it's in the parking lot.
And sometimes even just leaving post-its at it, like I love in-person trainings that have post-its on the tables because I'm like, I don't always want to write my question on my notes, but I want to make sure I come back to it. So like just throw some post-its on a table so I can write it, even if I don't physically take it to a parking lot if they don't have one. But yes, being able to just write, oh, this is my question, I can stick it aside so that I don't, have to write it in my notes or whatever, for sure.
I love that.
I know we do stewards, and there is a question in there about like an older woman at a church who has always done things with her students. And a lot, when I first started it, we had a lot of people say, like, well, she needs to protect herself from allegations. And I was like, I got so tired of hearing that. So learning from that and just kind of having it before, I don't even wait for somebody to answer that way because I don't want to make them feel like I'm calling them out. So I would just
Mhm.
say, a lot of us might be conditioned to say, well, she needs to protect herself from false allegations. But remember that's, and I go into my little spiel. So I've learned from those first few awkward situations and just noted that for the future because I know it might come up and I don't want to be like, well, actually, you're wrong. You're bad. Don't say that. So I just nip it in the bud before they can think it.
Yeah. And I love that, Jamie, because I love that you're normalizing for people. This is how we're used to thinking about this, right? This is kind of the cultural story that we have is like, I need to protect myself from allegations, not how do I model for children and young people how they deserve to be treated. And
Yeah,
yes,
I
go ahead,
like
sorry.
that even Becca said, "Hey, I just realized that's a hot button." Like sometimes we don't even realize it until
Yeah.
somebody says it and they're like, "Oh, yeah, I need to like make note of that for myself." Because sometimes we don't have that opportunity until we're in front of people. So I think even after, and we'll talk a little bit about this, even after for future preps, writing those things down of, hey, I didn't realize this is hot button. What can I do to prepare better?
Absolutely. All right, we have a quick scenario question for you all. So I'm going to flip us to the next slide.
All right. So, if you are invited to present to a community group that is dealing with the aftermath of a high profile situation related to work, how would you prepare? What are some key things that come up for you, especially when there is something kind of high profile occurring in your community?
And these can be big or small things.
Okay. So we have had experience with similar things being in school districts, especially if staff at the school are arrested for some
Hmm.
situations as we're coming in and presenting. Being able to talk with the staff at the school to know the impact and make sure that they're prepared as well. So having resources available for the people that we're presenting to that also know the situation,
Yeah.
so that they can also help out as needed, um, is vital. I think you being able to present on topics that are sensitive or are difficult at times, being able to rely on those resources, those mental health professionals who can assist alongside with those presentations.
Yes. And I love that part because, I might be there for an hour or a couple hours, right, to talk to them, and then I leave. But that person, that stakeholder in that organization who I empowered, right, they're going to be there and they're going to see those other team members every day.
Mhm.
Well, I think also being prepared to know that somebody's going to bring it up. Well, this just happened. And yes, I recognize that this happened in our community. However, and then whatever you need to say. And I recognize, and that's why I'm here. We're not going to probably discuss that specific topic, but let's talk about what we can do differently or whatever you need to do in that situation, whatever the topic is.
Yeah, Jamie said, addressing the elephant in the room. Just address it and say, what are we going to talk about? What are we not going to talk about? And having that in your back pocket. And I think as facilitators who are newer, sometimes it gets a little scary, right? You're going in, something has happened. But even as supervisors, we can prepare someone who has not done a facilitation in a setting like this to say, hey, this is how you address it. Address it, have those back pocket phrases.
Yeah. I love these ideas in the chat. Someone, Alexis said prayer, or if that looks like reflection for you, whatever that process, that practice looks like for guidance and to be trauma informed when having these sensitive conversations. And then Becca added, I also try to name that this isn't the only place this has happened and a better future is possible. It can be really easy to be discouraged and think, oh, I can't believe this happened here. We care so much, and this really scary or bad thing still happened. And say, yes, there are many places in our world where this has happened, and it doesn't have to continue happening. We can do things differently moving forward.
Also, along with that is like, hey, you're doing the stuff now, right? Maybe you didn't know better, but now you're going to learn it and we're going to move forward. We have had districts before I started that were on board to do something, and then a case came out, so they're like, well, this isn't a good time to do it. And I'm like, no, this is the time you should be doing it to show that you're taking it seriously. But they were more like, well, we don't want to draw attention to it. It's like, no, you were already going to do it, or whatever the case is. But we're like, hey, you're going to learn, and we're going to try to prevent this in the future, as opposed to we're just going to keep letting it happen. You guys are taking those next steps, along with what Becca said.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too about if we're not doing a training at our own sites, a lot of times we're going out and doing these in the community of having some of those conversations with host sites and being prepared to um, answer difficult questions that they may have or provide them some feedback if something has happened and being able to, like you said, Jamie, kind of stand your ground of this is why you should. It's going to happen. It's happened to me where people have tried to kind of back out of a conversation, but I think really understanding and creating that relationship with that host site so that they understand that you are not trying to cause any additional harm, but you're really there to provide some needed services or resources um, in that community or that specific facility. See, Kiki, they're already talking about the stuff that you do during. They
I
know
know y'all
some
are
of the
nailing
stuff.
it. Y'all are nailing it. Oh, I see another great comment in here. Um, Make comments around acknowledging that some people may need to make accommodations for themselves, like stepping out or needing to regroup. If the conversation gets too difficult, this helps people be more comfortable. Absolutely. Sometimes people need a permission slip, right? From you. Hey, this might be heavy. It's okay to step out. No one's going to follow you. No one's going to ask questions. If you want to debrief and process, we'll be here for that. But there's not judgment related to that.
And I will say, because of the topic that I cover in my presentations, I also make a comment like, we're all adults. If you need to step out and use the restroom, by all means, because I think sometimes when audience members are watching what other people are doing and they see
Mhm,
someone walk out, they automatically assume that they have been triggered by something. And so I
mhm.
try to say, hey, we're all adults. If you need to go to the restroom, step out. You need to make a phone call, by all means. And then it's, less uncomfortable if they do have to walk out of the room.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'm getting the sense that people are ready to talk about tools to use in the moment, right? We're kind of getting into that. We're tiptoeing in there. So let's talk a little bit about tools to de-escalate and cool down or redirect during the conversation itself. Um, so we talked a lot. Stephanie did a beautiful job of setting out how we can be intentional and thoughtful going into some of these conversations in the community. And so this is the opportunity for us to tap into that intention setting that we've done, right? So being clear what the session is about and what it's not. There may be questions that are really interesting questions or valid questions that come up that are still kind of taking us away from the conversation. So it's okay to redirect. This might also be an opportunity to redirect if things start getting a little bit heated, right? You might have to say from the front of the room, hey, we're here to talk about how to keep kids in our community safe from abuse, not to accuse anyone of hurting children, right? You might have to make that redirect really clearly from the front of the room. Um, Ask clarifying questions. If you are not sure what someone is saying, sometimes people are uncomfortable, so they will speak vaguely, right? Or they will kind of tiptoe around the thing that they want to say or ask about for whatever reason, right? So you might want to ask them to, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, what are your initial thoughts of how somebody might address that situation? Um, you could reframe the question. This is an opportunity to remind the group of the norms that you established, um, and of the values that we want to hold in our community, right? Or in their organization, right? If you know enough about this group of people or this organization, you can connect those things back. I also think sometimes when someone hears you sort of reiterate or clarify their question, they hear what you heard the first time, right? Um, I'm thinking about, this is an example that comes to my mind, but um, Becca and I used to work together for quite a while. And I remember we were co-facilitating, we were with some high school students. And I think about this all the time. So we had a student who said, well, you're taking that out of context. And so I can't remember who asked it, but one of us said, okay, what's the context that we're missing? Because we were like, it was me. Wow, someone really smart asked that question. Um, And the student really had to think about it. They felt like we were talking about a piece of media, like a song, I think, and they were getting kind of defensive because it was a song they really liked.
It
And
was that ad, that PlayStation ad.
oh, okay. Yeah. So we asked them what was the context that's missing. And when they thought about it, they were like, I don't really think there's enough context to make this not uncomfortable and offensive. Yeah. And so it kind of, I think like, we weren't trying to put this person on the spot. Um, but sometimes comments like that, like you're taking that out of context, um, become really good at like obfuscating what's really going on in the situation. And so if you can kind of cut through that a little bit, that gets everyone a little bit clearer on what's really going on, what we're talking about. Um, um, it's also an opportunity to reframe the question or concern. Um, so let's make sure that we're staying grounded on what we're here to talk about today. Naming, you know, it's normal to feel confused or to be curious about experiences that are different from your own. But asking questions like that might make someone uncomfortable, right? Or naming that might be an okay question to ask in this room where we're learning, but not to ask to a neighbor or a community member, right, about their own lived experience.
Yeah, I'll say I am notorious for saying, tell me more about that. Um, it's people kind of know are starting to realize, so I may need to change it up a little bit, but it
Uh-huh.
also gives me an opportunity to sometimes pause and wait. Like I love a good pause. One to maybe center myself or to make sure I'm really clearly understanding what someone is asking. We also get a lot of questions, obviously around gender identity and usage of pronouns. And so I also remind people like this is a safe place to ask your questions, and having them, ask questions and then asking them clarifying questions along with it. Are you talking about this? Is this part the part that makes you uncomfortable? To kind of get to some of that root of like, what are their values or what are their concerns? Because sometimes people are really nervous to say, I just don't believe in that.
Mm.
Um, so I've also had moments where I've said, "Hey, we're really here." Kind of goes back to the other one of the first bullet point of like, we're really here to talk about how we support someone regardless of who they are, what they believe. And that is our value at our organization. We know it's your value at your organization. So I think there's a point where you kind of can ask so many clarifying questions, but you have to redirect it. You have to get back to the point.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's thank you for bringing us back to that, right? Because sometimes we get so far down the rabbit hole of questions that we're like, how did we get here? And what are we talking about anymore? Um, I think too, um, you are in a unique position as the facilitator, right? Physically, you might be standing up at the front of the room, right? So you are looking at everyone else. So you have like an actually a unique position potentially in the space or however your space is set up, right? You can use that, right? I'm thinking about the comment someone had in the chat earlier about naming the elephant in the room, right? If you're observing changes happening in the space, you can kind of make a general observation, right? Ooh, I'm noticing some folks are kind of looking tense, or I'm hearing some of our voices getting a little bit louder, right? So I want to link us back to our group or our community agreements that we set and remind us of our group norm to listen to understand, not to speak over others. Maybe we need a quick break to get up and move around a little bit. Um, and that is an okay thing to do because other people are noticing that too, right? Or they're feeling it and they're like, I can't tell if anyone else can tell that I'm uncomfortable, right? Okay, I'm noticing that some folks are feeling like there's some stress in the room, right? You don't have to make it, you don't have to be like call anybody out. Like, I see this person in the back is looking very uncomfortable. Don't do that, right? But acknowledging like the change in tone in the space. All right, so we talked a little bit about redirecting back to the meeting topic and offering to talk with folks after the fact. I think this one can be tricky, right? I love the parking lot tip that someone shared. This can be a really good way to do that, especially if someone is bringing up something that's like maybe tangentially related, but feels like it would take us too far down a rabbit hole to really get into the information enough to answer their questions. When in doubt, use time as your scapegoat, right? We have a lot to talk about today, and I really want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're going to have to move on to the next conversation right now or the next activity. Um, and ask people to write it down. We'll come back to it. We can follow up after the conversation. Um, Another good example could be like, ooh, I definitely want to hear more about that. Let's talk after the presentation, right? And that might be about somebody's a personal experience that they're trying to lift up into the conversation. That could be about something that a concerning situation. There's a lot of ways that you could do that to make space, to carve space out to really honor what that person wants to bring to the conversation, even if there's not time to dig into it at the front of the room.
Yeah, I've even said, I really want to understand more about what you're talking about. Can we talk about this right afterwards? So you're still showing that intention of understanding the perspective while kind of keeping everyone on track and moving forward. I think also for parking lots, that's a really great idea, but also knowing like what things should be on a parking lot because sometimes people will say things and ask questions that you're like, I do not want to put that in front of
Yeah.
a group. So I really, you know what? I don't think I'm going to have that as a group discussion. I'd like to talk to you afterwards. I think that that would be a great discussion. So trying to think of also how do you navigate that sometimes?
Absolutely. And and while we're on that topic, Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about the follow-up?
Yeah. So I think, um, are you talking about like noting if you're not
Yeah.
sure about something? So I personally, I try to remind myself that I don't have to be an expert on everything. I'm also a little bit of a perfectionist, so it kind of drives me nuts. But I do believe in trust building in presentations and being out in the community. And I think someone already noted, like, we need to be able to say, I don't have the answer for that, but I am going to look it up and I will follow up. And people have gotten to the point that said that so many times that they know that I am going to follow up and I am going to cite the source or I am going to send them to a specific resource. But I think as presenters, a big portion of what we're doing is creating an atmosphere where people can ask questions and they can trust us. And so if we are giving them information that we are unsure of or is incorrect, it lowers the credibility of the work that we're doing. So it's okay to say, I don't know. I've even joked. I told Kiki, like, I love to joke around sometimes in facilitations, and sometimes I'll just be like, I'm having brain fog for a second. I'm sorry, that's not coming to me. Let me get back to you about that. And that's okay too. We're all
Yeah.
human.
Or I've said to people, that's a new one. I've never gotten that question before. So I'm definitely going to have to look that up. Sometimes it's something that's really specific, right? Or sometimes it's something that is just like a little bit out of left field enough that you're like, huh, okay. And that's okay too. Sometimes that humor can ease a little bit of the tension too. Um, so you can, I think a lot of the times as facilitators and especially as people who are working in, anti-violence fields, we really want to be able to support people and show up for people, right? And so I think this last point on here I want to talk about a little bit, right? You can validate someone's lived experience without necessarily agreeing with what they're saying or the way that they're behaving. You can name that the emotion or the experience that they're describing is valid, right? I would be really upset too if someone that I loved was hurt like that, right? I would be. That's true. I understand why they're upset. I understand why that emotion is showing up for them, right? And depending on what else is happening in the situation, you might have to redirect or link that back to one of our key messages or group norms, right? I would be really upset too. And we are not going to use language like that in this room, right? That can be uncomfortable. That can be hard, right? So I also want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to take us to the next slide, I think. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was going to link this to another thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's on the next slide. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. So, I think, there we go. The piece about validation, this is going to come up in a lot of the spaces that we're in. I'm sure that all of us have probably been in a situation where someone has shared about their own experience or the experience of a person close to them, and that has brought up some really valid anger or sadness or frustration that they weren't able to help or prevent that from happening or keep them safe. And those are really uncomfortable feelings for all of us: anger, sadness, frustration, guilt, whatever that feeling is. And often it can feel easier to hold that if we can put it on someone else, right? This is why we hear people saying, like, if someone ever did X, Y, and Z to my child, I would do A, B, or C, right? I would hurt them. They wouldn't show their face in my community. And like, people talk about how they would want to hold someone accountable, right? Or punish someone for hurting other people. We also live in a world that is like really focused on punishment. So it's really easy and normal for us to come to that place of like, I'm mad about something or someone was treated in a way that they didn't deserve. And I want to see punishment doled out, right? And so especially when we're talking about these really personal and sensitive topics, you might hear that come up, right? And the same way that we were talking earlier about addressing, like, pushing back on norms, as uncomfortable as that, like community norms or family norms, as difficult and uncomfortable as that might be, as the facilitator at the front of the room, it's it is our role, right, to remind folks that it is of course it's okay to be upset, right? It is normal and human to have that emotional reaction. what we can't do is bring more harm and violence into our community, right? That is not what we're here to do right now. We're here to talk about safety. We're here to talk about supporting people. We're here to talk about um, bridging, right, and making our community a safer place for everyone. Um, and it's hard to make space in that conversation for people justifying or making, talking about additional acts of violence. And I'm also going to point out in this place, if this escalates to a place of unsafety, right, where it becomes no longer safe, that's a different conversation, and you don't need to validate that. Okay. All right, now we're going to jump to the next slide, and I'm going to turn over to Stephanie to talk a little bit about reframing opposition.
Yeah, before that, I'd also wanted to mention that we have to know the difference between someone who's wanting to discuss something and someone who's wanting to argue. And we all know about like trauma responses, right? Like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so we may see people who are in this fight mode that can't get out of it. And I think it's really important as a presenter to be noticing how people are not just what they're saying, but how their body is reacting. Are they getting tensed up? Are they getting frustrated? Are they leaning in? Are they getting very verbal with others? And so there's ways that we want to make sure that we're de-escalating as quickly as possible and moving them into kind of a safety zone, like Kiki said. And unfortunately, this is where we start hearing inappropriate comments like those people, that person, that community, and we really want to bring people back into the fold. These are our neighbors and these are our community members, and this is how we are supporting them. So we want to make sure that we're getting people before they get to the point of no return in their frustration, but also realizing if we get to that point, we're not able to de-escalate. There may be comments like this that really start coming out, and how can we redirect once we get there? And I would even say, that disarming misconceptions by using statistics, the reframing of the opposition, you'll start hearing those people, that community, then, we'll start hearing misconceptions. We'll start hearing a lot of prejudicial language sometimes, and being really able to root ourselves in some stats and some verifiable anecdotal data so that we are able to kind of say that that's actually untrue. This is some of the data that actually is out there, and these are our community members, and we want to make sure that they are safe. And we can all agree that we want people to be safe. Sometimes also bring people back to that norm of like, we don't want people to be injured. We don't want people to be hurt. Let's make sure that we're not encouraging more harm.
Yes, this is one of my favorite back pocket phrases. And anyone who has co-facilitated with me has probably heard me say this a bunch of times. I'm so glad you brought that up, right? I am genuinely glad that they did because they're probably not the only one who had that thought in their head, right? If it is something we talk about victim blaming earlier, we talked about some of these narratives that exist um in sort of our culture. um yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because you're not the only person who's ever heard that, right? Probably all of us have, and probably other people are having that come up for them right now, right? So naming that person kind of stepped outside of maybe out of their comfort zone, right? Or maybe they felt like they were going to get pushback from me for bringing it up. But I'm glad that they did because we have to name it in order to address it. Then we offer data, right? Then we let them know that's such a good question. And I think a lot of people think that, but actually we know that, people with disabilities are impacted by interpersonal violence at higher rates, right? So let's talk about why that might be, right? And you're giving people the opportunity to reflect on something that maybe they haven't thought about before. You're giving them the opportunity to clear up a misconception, and you're empowering them to get involved in the conversation and kind of push back on their own belief or their own norm. Which is something that we want to encourage people to do all the time. That's critical thinking, right? Yeah, we can come back to the stats and the research, right? Our goal is not like the learning objective is not change everyone's mind, right? The learning objective is like empower people to use skills to make their community safer, to better understand, right, how this population is impacted by violence, right? It's not like for them to leave as a different person. That's probably not a realistic goal. And if that's your goal for every hour that you spend with a community group, you're probably going to leave disappointed more often than not, right? Um, and I'm thinking, okay, I see another comment in the chat. I always remind myself when I feel challenged by a participant that I would much rather them give me the opportunity to address it than to leave the room thinking I have never considered a particular perspective. Yes. And I also think that folks that you might be interacting with who maybe are not spending the same amount of time and energy thinking about and working through these questions as we are might think they've never even thought about this, right? And I want them to know, oh no, I've thought about it a lot. Right? I'm thinking about it all the time, my friend. I'm talking to people about this all the time. Um, I don't work with kids anymore. Joke's on you. I have read articles about this. Yeah. I was gonna say I don't work with kids anymore. So this is gonna be an outdated phrase, but like I'm not new to this, right? I am true to this. Like I know about this, my friend. Um, and so like let me show you that like I know a little bit what I'm talking about, and I'm happy to like get into the weeds a little bit with you. I'm not going to be like the literature suggests that blah 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 because that is a really good way to turn everyone's brain off immediately. Um, but like to let people know that that information exists and that you know what it is. You don't have to like cite the article, right? But let them know like there's really great research that shows blah blah blah. Okay. Now I'm getting into the yapping thing again. Oh, yes. Okay. This slide is in the wrong place. And Stephanie did a beautiful job of talking about how challenging conversations often kind of push our buttons enough to get us out of our comfort zone and sometimes even activate people's trauma responses. But I want to share this tool. This I think is really helpful for considering where folks are at in their own headspace, right? Or where you are at in your headspace, right? So knowing the difference between someone who wants to discuss and someone who wants to argue with you, right? Does this person want to learn, right? Are they coming to this conversation in good faith because they want to learn and be challenged? Or are they coming to this conversation because they think that they are going to make you look stupid, right? Or that they think, they're gonna trick they're gonna outsmart everyone. As a facilitator, we're not showing up to try to outsmart everyone or make anyone look foolish. That is not our goal, right? We want to bring folks on this journey with us and make sure that they have the resources and the information that they need. Um, and sometimes you will run into people who, for whatever reason, maybe they're just having a really bad day, are so far away from their learning zone that they are not taking in any of the information. They are mad, they are uncomfortable, they are feeling feisty, right? They want to argue, they don't want to learn. And it is okay to just say, like, that's where that person is at right now. Maybe if they get more regulated, we can move forward constructively. But in the headspace that they're in right now, we probably aren't going to do that in the next 45 minutes, right? And then find where you are too. If you are getting into your alarm zone as a facilitator, what do you need to do to regulate a little bit more, right? To get back into that space of curiosity and learning and comfort with challenges. And that's not something that we can necessarily tell you, right? That's something that takes some reflection and some intention and some conversation with your colleagues and your co-facilitators and your supervisors. All right. So we're doing all right. Feel free to share if there are tools here that we've talked about that you've used that have been helpful for you, or maybe a tool that you would like to try, whether it's something that you feel comfortable using or that pushes you out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to mention sometimes, depending on your identity, there's an assumption that, we should be very pleasant and that we can't be assertive. And I think that is something that I'm hearing a lot of is it is okay to be assertive. It's okay to be clear, and we have to be able to use that strategy when we're facilitating conversations. And so I do it, but I just didn't think about it until you were talking, Kiki. And I was like, yeah, we need to be assertive. And certain identities have been taught that, like, oh, be pleasant, be accommodating. That is okay. Yes, Kiki, clear is kind.
It's
Exactly.
kind to you and it's kind to your audience. Yeah. Another tool I'm going to toss out while we're thinking is, and I meant to mention this earlier, this is one of my favorite little tidbits of information. The average adult, right? And that's a big spectrum of people. The average adult takes 7 seconds to process a question after it's asked. So when you're a facilitator and you ask a question to your audience, give them a minute to think. Give them at least 10 seconds to think. I will say one of my biggest facilitator pet peeves is like being in a training or something and someone goes, "Any questions? Okay, great. Let's move on." What? How could I have formed a question, let alone asked a question in that amount of time? Yes. Some people are very uncomfortable with silence. Some people, there are probably people on here who maybe you have also been like a forensic interviewer or something, and you're like, silence doesn't bother me. I could sit quietly with you all day, right? And props to you. You were tough. But for the rest of us, it's fine to count in your head.
I have a really hard, like, the out of my comfort zone is when somebody starts getting a little hostile, or like they
Hmm.
definitely have a preconceived idea, and it's twofold. One part, it's me being passive and I don't want to push against them on some things, but then some things it's also like I'm seething inside and I want to unprofessionally be like, "Oh my gosh, you're wrong, and here's all the reasons you're wrong," but I can't do that in my role. So it's like a combination of those. So figuring out, like, I like some of those phrases of like, thank you for bringing that up, or tell me more about that. Like you said in your example, Kiki, like, well, what is the context? Like, what, like, kind of putting it back on them, like, what do you hear what you're saying, kind of thing. But I'm not as good at that. That's definitely something I need to work on, because that is my out of my comfort zone whenever an adult is like, no, I don't agree with you. I'm like, okay, well, you're maybe adultier than me, but you're still wrong.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. Thanks for talking about getting out of your comfort zone too. See, we're already modeling.
I think also having those phrases in your back pocket allows you to kind of focus on what your body is portraying, right? Like people usually will be like, I can't tell if you're upset when someone says a really inappropriate question. I'm like, yeah, it's because I have my phrases. I
Hmm.
have my phrases in my back pocket, and I'm focusing on my breathing and making sure that my anxiety stays down, because if I get escalated, that other person is going to get escalated. And I have to make sure that I'm creating a safe space.
Yes. Honestly, I think that's one of the best compliments you can get as a facilitator. I didn't even know you were upset when they asked that question. I'm like, thank you. I worked so hard on that. I worked really hard to not look mad, right? Yeah, to school my face a little bit. Tell me more. Yeah. So Jamie kind of brought this up, right? We have a quick scenario. We're going to just talk about a couple of pieces. So you're presenting and an audience member shares a personal connection to the subject. Oh man, I meant to change this scenario. So I'm going to put us back on the other slide and I'm just going to read it to you all. Um, where is my scenario? Okay. An audience member shares a, there we go. It's in the chat. Shares a personal connection to the subject and begins to get emotionally dysregulated. How could you address this? Oh my gosh, I'm cracking up at this comment in the chat. One problem I have is that it's easier to control my body reaction, but my facial reactions slip right out. That's very funny.
Um, so ideally before you start your presentations or your conversations, setting boundaries within that, and just making sure people know about that we want them to take care of themselves and that it's okay to step out. And so then you can reference that back in that moment, um, not drawing attention to it, but even offering up a pause and just saying, we can take some time if someone needs to get some water or a bathroom break. Um, I know earlier in our presentations, we also mentioned um, if people have personal stories to save them for the end, and we can talk to them more one-on-one. And it's not because we don't care about their experiences, but it's just that we have limited time in the presentation we have. We want to make sure everyone has time to learn this new skill or have time to ask those questions. So rephrasing it back to that, let them feel what they're feeling, but give them a space to step out and take care of themselves in those moments without drawing attention to it.
Yes, I love that. And I love, love, love that piece. I bet a lot of us are already doing this, right? In your preparation, right? Thinking about and being intentional about how are you going to acknowledge from the beginning of the conversation that this might be difficult or sensitive, right? If we are talking about violence at all, right? If we are talking about harm, if we're talking about trauma, we want to let people know. And we also want to acknowledge that depending on the situation, you may or may not have any control over what information the folks in the room got about your presentation before they got there. One of the worst facilitations I've ever done that had the most like upset reactions was because people did not know that they were coming to a workshop about sexual violence. They were just told they had to be there at 3 o'clock.
Been there, been
Yep.
there. And it was
And
way uncomfortable. And I knew the presenter.
mhm. Oh, that one that I was talking about, I was the presenter. And the audience was a group of college women. And we know that statistically, college women and college students experience a high level of victimization. And so their room was full of survivors and their friends, right? And they were mad because they were not prepared. And it, there are probably things I could have done better, but man, if I could have gone back in time and made sure that all of those people knew what they were coming to, that would have been a very, very different situation. I'm looking at some other comments in the chat. Validate emotions, model taking a deep breath and prompting folks to join. Absolutely. Yes, if you're a Darkness to Light Stewards facilitator, they include in the script. There is a line about disclosures, about sharing personal stories, sharing like a content or a trigger warning ahead of time. Thank them for sharing. Um, and then blame it on yourself that you feel like this is a great moment to take a break for the group to ground themselves. Yeah. Or like, I need a drink of water. Does anyone else need to do that? Does anyone else need to stretch their legs? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think too, you're thinking about this person getting dysregulated. Are they in their alarm zone, right? Do they need to regulate before they can move forward? Can we offer them some group norms, right? Would that be helpful? Do they need to just step out of the room? Is there anyone else in the space who can provide them support? Do you have a co-facilitator? Is there a host from the group or the organization that can take them out into the hallway and check in with them or give them a minute? Um, that definitely
I
makes it
never know if
easier.
I should address it. Like if they are, because I've had students, like if they're
Mhm.
trying, because like Stephanie said earlier, some people don't want to, even though we make the announcement,
Yeah,
like take care of yourself, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, they still feel like all the eyes are going to be on them if they walk out. And so like
yeah,
I had a student in a classroom just like visibly breaking down in the corner, like her friends were consoling her around her, but I was just like, the other half of the room, like the kids right by her recognized it, the other half of the room didn't. I didn't want to go over and like say something to her. It wasn't a place where we could like all take a break.
yeah,
In that one, I just like kind of discreetly got my phone out and text the counselor and had her come in and
yeah,
pull the girl out. But especially with an adult, like I don't always know if maybe just the people around them are noticing it. I'm like, do I mention it? Do I not mention it? Because then it's going to draw all eyes on them. So I do like the examples of like, hey, I have a tiny bladder. I need to take a quick break. Why don't we all take a break? I think that's going to be
Yep.
one that I try to remember. Obviously, I can't do that with students, but for sure with adults, because I never know, like, if they're like Bart kind of reference, if they're starting to like spill out a story, I
Hmm.
kind of have some tools like you guys have mentioned and that I've done to try to mitigate that. But if they're trying to just like hide it in their seat, that's always my like, I don't know if I should say
Yeah.
something, if I should not. So that's hard.
I would say, and again, this is one person's perspective, right? I would say if you're in the classroom, you're with students, there should be another adult in there, right? The teacher, the counselor, whoever, tap that person. They might not be noticing, right? They might be checking their email, they might be doing something else. They might not be like scanning the room like you are. So just like tapping the teacher or whoever it is and letting them know, or like you said, reaching out to the counselor, hey, come in. There's a student who I think you need to check in on. Um, if you are in the classroom and there's not another adult, that's a different situation, and you need to make sure there's another adult in the room. That's a conversation for another day. If you are with a group of adults, right? If you have an organization or a group that's bringing you in, ideally, if you're communicating with a contact person ahead of time, maybe have that conversation with them. Hey, if someone is gets dysregulated or needs to step out, is it okay if I grab you to kind of help them do that? Right? So that they're not in the moment like, oh, am I supposed to do that? I don't know what to say, right? But just to give them like, hey, maybe this person needs to step out for a minute and they just might need permission slip, or maybe they are feeling so dysregulated that they physically can't do that on their own. Like they can't step up, stand up from their chair and move over.
Yeah, I've also
Yeah,
done
that's good.
yeah, I've also done with students where I'm like at a point that I could like pose a question and say, "Hey, turn to your neighbor real quick
Yep.
and talk about that." And then you're able to kind of walk over and say, "Hey, do you need to take a bathroom break?" And
I
then you
love
can
that.
also get an
Mhm.
adult to kind of go out there, but that works also
Yeah.
for adults as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Just to distract everyone else, essentially, like,
yep.
hey, look over here instead of this. I love that. Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
good. And that's something you mentioned, Kiki, actually, with adults. Like, we always have an adult in the room for the presentations, but sometimes it's just the teacher whose classroom we're using. And so
Hmm.
they're focused on their own work. They're doing that their own thing, which is fine. But maybe sometimes when I go in, like, hey, if I notice a kid getting dysregulated, I might just come over and like tap on your desk or something. And that's just, setting that up for them of like, hey, just in case we had this last year and I just want to be more prepared to address those students who might have an issue. So love it. Thank you both.
Absolutely. All right. Now I'm gonna scapegoat time and say we're getting close to our time. So we're gonna hustle a little bit through this last section. And we're gonna talk about kind of after the conversation, wrapping up and closing the loop. And I'm gonna turn it over to Stephanie.
Yeah, so some of this we've actually already kind of organically talked about, but reminding ourselves that we want to circle back to any outstanding questions or concerns a participant has raised privately. This is a great time if there has been an issue and someone has gotten dysregulated or they have kind of gone into detail about their personal situation to kind of circle back, check on them, show empathy, make sure that they're okay. Also follow through with the follow up. Like that's part of following up at the end of the presentation, but even after the presentation, when you all have left, if you've said, hey, I'll get back to you or I'll get back to the group about XYZ, a resource, a citation, whatever that is, really trying to do that. Again, it builds that sense of trust that you're credible, that you care. Um, so making sure you follow through with your follow-up. And then separate frustration from actionable feedback. I think we all want to have a great presentation. Like who wants to go to a presentation and it fail? But stuff happens and sometimes even the best facilitation, the best presentations, we get some feedback that can be kind of disheartening or difficult to take on. So really separating like what is it that I can get out of this feedback and what tangible things can I take away, maybe it was something about the slide deck or having more interactive moments, things like that. And then leave behind, don't take personally anything specific that is not really helpful. Because sometimes people will say things that are just a little rude and not helpful. Leave it
Oh yeah.
behind. It's not on you, it's on them.
If you get one eval that says like, you have an annoying voice, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. If you have an outlier that,
Yeah.
I think we've all had those like evals that have come back and everybody's got like glowing reviews. They love the presentation. You have that one person who's like one all the way
Yeah.
down and like, this isn't helpful. They need to lean more into their presentation skills. Ignore that. That's an outlier.
hmm
Focus on some of the positive. But if you're seeing some pretty common themes in particular, maybe take that into some consideration. Yeah, it's huge. It's both on the recipient of the feedback and as the deliverer of feedback.
hmm
And people are honestly mad about something else, not the presentation. Usually so. Or mad at the system. Yeah.
hmm
Make sure you debrief with the host and or other speakers. So I usually have somebody that afterwards, if I struggle through a presentation or maybe some things were said in the presentation that personally were triggering for me or maybe upsetting for me, that I have someone to talk with. But I also think it's really important to talk to the host about, hey, give me some feedback. How did maybe a situation came up. How do you think that that went? Do you think that that went well? Do you think that there's some things that we could do a little bit better? Is there anything that in the future if we have a presentation here that you would like me to do instead of X, Y, Z? And then I think co-facilitators too, being able to go back and say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? You know, what what did you feel comfortable with? I mean, sometimes we're our own worst critics. So also talking to the other speaker, they're like, I don't think that at all. I thought that went really well. So make sure you close that loop and make sure you're getting appropriate feedback, but also like take on some of those accolades. Like you put time into this, you want to hear some of the good stuff too. And then,
And
oh, go ahead,
on
Kiki.
that note, I just want to say if you don't already do this, I hope that each of you all will, here's a permission slip, right? Will start saving your like accolades, your feedback, the
Mhm.
emails that you get from the organization after the training where they said, wow, that was incredible, right? Or the email that they send to your supervisor where they say, wow, that person really knocked my socks off, right? Or the eval responses that you get that say, wow, this person really made me feel comfortable having this conversation, or whatever it is. Save those things. Take screenshots, save them in a folder on your computer, save them in a physical folder if you use paper evals, and look at them when you're having a bad day or after a really hard training, because those things are just as true about you as the hard days. Oh my gosh, I call it building my brag book.
I love it.
Build your brag book, please. I'm begging you, build your brag book. I am obsessed with that.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have terrible days or a facilitation doesn't go really well and we can get really stuck in, oh, I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done that, and maybe I'm not doing a very good job. So having that file, I know I had a file that if I was having just a rough day, I could go to and be like, okay, I'm not terrible. I had a movement, or hey, that just didn't go as well as I thought it was gonna go.
Completely.
Yeah. Reflect on potential improvements. It's okay for us to, list out, oh, I wish I could do this or that. Um, not harping on maybe some of all the negative things that we've done, but really focusing on self-improvement. What else could I bring into this presentation? What resources? I actually was talking to a pastor the other day and they're doing improv, and he told me, he's like, Stephanie, the improv helps me get up in front of people and like I feel like I'm a better presenter now. Like, what are some things that would be helpful in our toolkit or just as a presenter to get better? Especially if you're starting to see some common, realities in your presentations of like, oh, my my slide deck doesn't look as well, or I notice I always get really nervous when someone starts raising their voice. What's a resource? What's something that I can do to help me with that? And then I think Kiki brought this up previously. If at any point there is a safety concern at STL AVP, the board and I actually have a safety plan because most of what I do is outreach and training and advocacy. If there's ever a safety concern following a presentation, don't ask or don't hesitate to ask someone to walk you out to your vehicle. Um, Sometimes I will, especially if it's at night, I'll say, hey, this is a night program. Can someone walk me out? And I do that even as part of my preparation, regardless if I feel like there's a safety issue, if I'm going into a parking garage, if the walk is pretty far. But I think especially if you've had a very heated presentation, lingering behind, answering questions, and then pulling that host aside to say, I don't feel comfortable. I would like someone to escort me. And I don't think it's wrong to ask.
No, advocate for your needs. Yeah. And if there is a safety concern, I would also highly recommend call your colleague, call a supervisor, let them know.
Yeah, document it.
Document it. Yeah.
Yeah. I worked with a community partner at one point, was doing presentations. They would show up at my presentations and started noticing that they would also try to, after they've been to my presentations, started showing up at my work. And I was like, oh, I need to document. Something is not appropriate. So if you get that weird feeling of like something doesn't feel quite right, something seems a little off, I say better safe than sorry, document it. Um, this also goes for like community partners. Sometimes, as community partners, some things can happen at an event, especially like a co-occurring event, and being able to give your supervisor a heads up of like, hey, this thing happened, I had to leave, so that they are aware. And so even, the executive director can handle any kind of backlash from that. Unfortunately, it happens. Thankfully, not that very often, but we want to be aware of documentation when necessary.
Absolutely. All right, we are getting close to our time, so I'm going to skip ahead, but I will encourage all of you to think about how you care for yourself personally and professionally after a difficult training experience. And feel free to write those things in the chat if you're interested. We are coming to the end of our time together. So I dropped a link in the chat, but I also have this QR code that will take you to the same place. This is a really brief evaluation of today's training. We talked a lot about feedback and making improvements, and that is something that we take very, very seriously. Feedback is a gift. So if you have feedback for us, we're excited to hear it. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you all so much for all of the nuggets of wisdom that you shared, for all of the feedback, for all of the questions, for all of the examples and situations. So much of the value of these skill builder trainings come from the learning that we share with each other. And so I'm so grateful every time someone shares in this setting, in this space. Um, um, we have 2 more prevention skill builder sessions this year. In October, we're going to be talking about hotspot mapping for safer schools. That date may have to change because I'm going to be presenting that one, and I think I have to go out of town. I have to go to a conference that day. So TBD on October date, but I will get that to you all very soon. And then in December, the last session of this year, we're going to be doing some community asset mapping for safer communities. So we're going to be talking about school-specific mapping tools as well as community mapping tools. All of that information is available in the same place that you registered for this training, and that information will be available or will be included in the follow-up email that you all receive after this training as well. As a reminder, the slides and the recording from today's training, as well as some of the other resources that we mentioned, will all be included in that follow-up email that will come to you early next week. So keep an eye out for that. I it is 10:30, so I will pause here. Stephanie, do you have any closing comments or anything you want to say before we wrap?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is like we are not going to always be perfect, but we can do things to prepare. We can do things to have in our back pocket during presentations, and then we can always improve. So we're not going to get it always 100% correct, but I think that's why it's so important that we have some of those tools and we have each other to talk through when things don't go exactly as planned. So, be gracious with yourself, be open to learning, and always feel free if you want to reach out to Kiki or myself and say, "Hey, I had this situation and I wasn't sure what to do." Like, we've been doing it for a while. We may have an idea.
Yes. Well, and we'll put our contact information in the chat as well. We can go ahead, Randy, and pause the recording now. And I know Stephanie and I both have a little bit of time. If folks want to stay on, if you have questions or there are other things you want to talk about, we'll pause the recording so that is the end of the recorded session. If folks have to hop off, feel free. If you want to stay and you have